How dare you hit my wife?
You call this food? The way you poisoned our brother's mind against his own blood? I have never claimed to be anything but his wife. His wife. A barren wife who wants to snatch our brother.
Enough! You will not speak to my wife that way in my house. The both of you.
My son, why are you slapping because of this woman?
So, Mama, you are in support of their ill treatment towards my wife? Pack your things and go!
Chinedu, please. We are sorry.
Out of my house! Get out of my house!
Please, we are sorry. Please forgive us. Forgive them.
I'm so sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you sooner.
You're here now.
Would you forgive your family if they should harm your biggest joy? This is the story of Chinedu, who is unaware that he is about to lose the one being that means the world to him.
He did not yet know that in less than 6 months, something drastic would happen to his wife. He did not yet know that she was already dying, and he did not yet know that the woman his family had spent a year tormenting had, in secret, been the very reason 2 of them still had roofs over their heads. This is that story. To understand how a house built on love became a house built on cruelty, you have to go back to the boy who became a father before he ever became a husband. Chinedu was 19 when his own father died, left with 3 younger sisters, a grieving mother, and a boy who had to do everything to protect his family. He took a job as a shipping clerk, then a supervisor. Then, years later, he started his own logistics company, small and stubborn the way he was. Every naira he earned went somewhere else before it ever touched his own pocket. He paid Ngozi's school fees through university. He paid Chiamaka's fees through a diploma she abandoned twice. He built his mother a house with 3 bedrooms and a veranda she once said, laughing, "Makes me feel like a queen, my son." He financed 2 of his sister's business ventures, a boutique that folded in 8 months, a hair salon that folded in 5. He paid hospital bills without being asked twice. By the time he turned 34, Chinedu was no longer simply a brother. He was infrastructure. He was the foundation the entire family stood on, and none of them had ever once stopped to ask what would happen to the house if the foundation ever decided to build something of its own. Then he married Hanna. She was 30, an accountant, with a laugh that startled people because it came so easily, so full, so unguarded. She had grown up an only child, raised by a widowed mother who scrubbed floors at a private hospital to keep her daughter in school. Hanna knew in her bones what sacrifice looked like. She recognized it instantly in Chinedu and loved him harder for it. At their wedding, Chinedu stood before both families and for the first time in 20 years said the sentence that would detonate everything. "I will always help my family," he said, his voice steady, his hand in Hanna. "My sisters, you are grown women. It is time you begin standing on your own feet." The hall did not erupt into applause. It went silent. Ngozi's smile did not reach her eyes. Chiamaka's fingers tightened around her champagne glass hard enough that the stem creaked. Her mother lowered her gaze to her lap and did not lift it again for the rest of the reception. Nobody said congratulations to Hanna that night. What they said, in whispers passed hand to hand like a lit match, was simpler and far more dangerous. "This woman has stolen our brother." The rumors reached Hanna before the sisters did. She was accused, in circles she had never entered, of controlling Chinedu's accounts, of forbidding him to see his mother, of casting some vague, unspecified spell that had turned a devoted brother into a stranger. None of it was true, but truth has never been a requirement for a family determined to hate. When the sisters finally cornered her, in her own living room, uninvited, arms crossed like a tribunal, They expected tears or defensiveness or the guilty scramble of a woman caught. Instead, Hanna set down her cup of tea, looked each of them in the eye, and said something that should have ended the war before it began. "Please," she said, "don't fight your brother because of me. I promise you, I never asked him to stop helping you. He only wants you to stand on your own because one day none of us will be here to catch you. Isn't it better you learn to catch yourselves now while he can still watch and be proud?" The room was quiet. For exactly 4 seconds, something like shame flickered across Chiamaka's face. Then Ngozi laughed, short, sharp, disbelieving. Listen to her, so gentle, so wise, butter would not melt in her mouth. She leaned forward. "You think we don't know a performance when we see one? You want us to think you're innocent. That's the oldest trick in the book." "I'm not performing anything," she said quietly. "I only want peace in this family."
"Then give us back our brother," Chiamaka snapped, "and you can have all the peace you want." Hanna said nothing further. She simply picked her cup back up and let the silence answer for her. Kindness, offered without armor, is often mistaken for weakness by people who have never had to survive on it. The sisters left that afternoon more convinced than ever that Hanna was their enemy, not because of anything she had done, but because of the one thing she refused to do. She refused to fight back. 6 weeks later, the 2 younger sisters arrived at Chinedu's gate with 4 suitcases between them and a story about new jobs close by. "Just 1 month," Ngozi promised, hugging her brother tightly at the door. "We won't be any trouble." Chinedu, who had spent his entire adult life unable to say no to his sisters, said yes before Hanna had even come downstairs. And Hanna, despite everything, despite the whispered insults, despite the tribunal in her living room, welcomed them with a smile and freshly made rooms. "Family is family," she told her husband that night, resting her head on his chest. "I want them to feel at home here." She did not know that upstairs, behind a locked bathroom door, 2 sisters were sealing a pact with their fingers laced together like schoolgirls. "1 year," Ngozi whispered. "By the time this year ends, that woman will be gone from this house, one way or another." What followed was not a single dramatic act of cruelty. It was worse. It was erosion, 100 small, deniable wounds, each one too minor to report, all of them together enough to break a person. Hanna's blood pressure medication vanished from the bathroom cabinet, only to reappear 3 days later in the trash, unexplained. Her favorite blouse, a gift from her late father before he passed, was found with a bleach stain shaped like an accident that was no accident. Her food, when she was too exhausted to cook for herself, arrived at her plate reheated past the point of safety, served with a smile and the words, "I hope it's still good." Neighbors began greeting her with strange, appraising looks, the fruit of quiet stories planted by sisters who had perfected the art of concerned whispering. "We just worry about our brother, that's all. She's changed since the wedding. Have you noticed?" And late at night, while Hanna slept, phones were touched, messages read, some quietly deleted before Chinedu ever came home to see what her wife had actually written to her mother, to her doctor, to herself. Every time Chinedu, sensing tension he could not name, asked his wife, "Hanna, is everything okay in this house?" she would touch his face, smile, the smile that undid him completely, and say, "They're just adjusting, my love. Give them time." She was lying to protect them and her husband. She had no idea how much more she still had to keep away from him. 3 months before the sisters ever arrived, Hanna had sat in a small consulting room with fluorescent lights too bright for the news the doctor was about to deliver. "Stage 3, the oncologist said gently. It's aggressive, but it's not hopeless. We need to start chemotherapy immediately. Hanna's hands did not shake. She had already suspected. The fatigue, the lump she had found alone in the shower one ordinary Tuesday, the sharp stab of pain she had dismissed as stress for too many months. The only person she told was her mother. Mama Hanna, 71 years old, still sharp enough to see through her daughter's every performance, gripped her hand across the small kitchen table and said what any mother would say. "You must tell Chinedu. Hanna, you must tell your husband." Hanna shook her head, slow and certain. "He has spent his whole life carrying people, Mama. His sisters, his mother, his father's ghost. If I tell him this, I take away the only thing he's ever had that was just for him. A wife who is whole. A wife who is not another burden to bear." Her voice cracked just once. "Let me be the one thing in his life he doesn't have to save." And when it's too late, another asked, eyes wet, "When you're done and he finds out you carried this alone in a house full of people who called you cruel, what do you think that will do to him?" Hanna looked down at her own hands. "I don't know," she whispered. "I only know I can't tell him. Not yet, but let's see how it goes." She began her treatments in secret, driving herself to appointments while her husband believed she was at extra work training, wearing wigs matched precisely to her own hair, timing her exhaustion around his schedule so he would never see her collapse into a chair the moment his car left the driveway. She was dying, and she knew she had to tell her husband, and in the very same house, two sisters were about to find the evidence and mock it without ever asking a single question. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. Chiamaka, searching Hanna's dresser for a scarf she had no real intention of borrowing, found instead a small zip pouch of medication bottles and familiar names printed across each label, alongside a folded appointment card from an oncology unit. She did not read it carefully. She did not ask what the words meant. She called her sister into the room, and together they turned Hanna's private war into a punchline. "Chemotherapy," Ngozi repeated, flipping the appointment card over as though it were a piece of gossip rather than a diagnosis. "That's not for cancer, is it? Isn't that also used for—" She lowered her voice, delighted with her own theory. "For infertility treatments?" "That explains everything," Chiamaka said, eyes wide with cruel discovery. "No wonder there's no baby after a whole year of marriage. She's barren, and she's been hiding it, letting our brother waste his best years on a woman who can never give him a child." They laughed. Actually laughed, doubled over at the dresser, delighted with a secret they believed made Hanna small. They had no idea the woman they were mocking was fighting quietly and without a single complaint for her life. When Hanna came home that evening and found her drawer disturbed, she said nothing. She simply closed it, sat on the edge of her bed, and let herself cry for a while before wiping her face and going downstairs to help serve dinner. If Hanna had hoped an elder's wisdom might calm the house, that hope died the day her mother-in-law moved in to help keep the peace, and instead became its loudest general. Mama Chinedu had never forgiven Hanna for a crime that existed only in her own mind, the crime of being loved by her son in a way that no longer left room for her to be the center of his world. She began comparing Hanna aloud at the dinner table to Adeze, the girlfriend Chinedu had dated for 2 years before Hanna, a woman her mother had adored, mostly because Adeze had never once suggested that a grown man might need to say no to his family. Adeze would never have let this house descend into all this quarreling, she said one evening, stirring her soup without looking up. Our son changed the day you entered this family, Hanna. Before you, this family was together. Now look at us. Hanna set another plate on the table, hands steady, despite the bruise the words left somewhere beneath her ribs. I only want what is best for Chinedu, she said quietly. What is best for Chinedu was his family, not you, his mother replied. Hanna did not argue. She simply refilled the water jug, cleared the plates when the meal was done, and washed every dish in a kitchen full of women who would not once say thank you. She had learned by then that defending herself only fed the fire. Silence, at least, starved it. What none of them knew, what she made sure none of them ever knew, was that even as they insulted her, she was quietly, secretly, in severe pain and agony from her cancer diagnosis. Before every chemotherapy session, in the hour before dawn, when the house was finally still, Hanna sat at her small writing desk and wrote her husband a letter.
Not to be delivered immediately. Not even, she told herself, to necessarily be delivered at all, but because writing to him felt like speaking to him honestly, in a way she could not yet manage face to face. She folded each letter carefully and placed it inside a small wooden jewelry box her father had given her as a girl, the only inheritance she had left of him. One afternoon, while cleaning what she believed was an unused guest wardrobe, Chiamaka found the box. She opened it, saw a stack of folded paper in her sister-in-law's neat handwriting, and, without reading a single word, decided the letters were evidence of something conspiratorial, a plan, a manipulation. She carried the box to the small fire pit behind the house, where dry leaves were burned each week, and one by one she fed Hanna private confessions to the flames. She never told anyone what she'd done. She never knew what she had destroyed. Somewhere in that fire went a letter that would have told Chinedu, in her wife's own hand, exactly how much she loved him and exactly how afraid she was of leaving him behind. The unraveling began on an afternoon Chinedu was never supposed to be home. A cancelled meeting sent him back early, and he walked through his own front door to the sound of his wife's name being spat like an insult. And if she thinks she can keep hiding things in this house, Ngozi was saying, standing over Hanna, who sat small and still on the living room couch. Her sister-in-law respected her for barely even flinching. His wife, Hanna said quietly, not lifting her head. His wife, Chiamaka scoffed, a barren wife who, enough. The word cracked through the room like a whip. Chinedu stood in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, his face a mask none of them had ever seen before. He crossed the room in 4 strides, and before either sister could react, his palm connected with Ngozi's cheek, giving her a sharp, sudden, and fatal slap. The room went silent. "You will not speak to my wife that way in my house," he said, voice shaking with a fury 11 months in the making. "Not one more time, not ever again." Ngozi's hand flew to her face, more shocked than hurt. Chiamaka backed toward the door. Within an hour, both sisters had packed their bags and left, their mother trailing behind them in stunned, wounded silence. Chinedu turned to his wife, breathing hard, adrenaline still roaring in his ears. "I'm so sorry," he said, kneeling in front of her, taking her face in both his hands. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you sooner." Hanna looked at him, truly looked at him, memorizing his face the way a person memorizes something they know they are about to lose, and smiled through sudden tears. "You're here now," she whispered. "That's enough." That same night,
her body finally gave out the resistance it had been fighting for months. She collapsed in the hallway outside their bedroom, unconscious before she hit the floor. The emergency room lights were too bright, the way they always are in the moments that change a person's life forever. Chinedu paced the corridor while doctors moved around his wife with the calm, practiced urgency of people who had seen this kind of collapse before. When the oncologist finally called him into a small side room, she did not waste time on gentle preambles. "Mr. Eze, your wife has been undergoing chemotherapy for stage 4 cancer for approximately 8 months. Tonight's collapse suggests the disease may have progressed further than her last scan indicated. I need to ask, were you aware of her diagnosis?" Chinedu heard the words. He understood each one individually, and still, somehow, they refused to arrange themselves into anything he could accept as real. "No," he said, his voice broken. "I didn't know. I didn't know anything." He walked into her hospital room like a man wading through water and found her wife awake, pale against white sheets, watching him with an exhausted, guilty tenderness. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. "This whole time, while they insulted you, while they mocked you for medication you were hiding in a drawer, you knew you were dying and you let me believe you were only tired." "I didn't want to take away your peace," Hanna whispered. "You've spent your whole life being someone's rescue. I wanted, just once, to be the one who protected you instead." Chinedu sank into the chair beside her bed, took her hand, and for the first time since he was 19 years old, allowed himself to break completely. The golden son, the rescuer, the man who had carried everyone, finally letting someone see him fall apart as he cried uncontrollably. "You should have told me," he said through tears. "I would have carried this too. I would have carried anything, Hanna. Don't you know that?" "I know," she said softly, brushing his tears away with a hand that trembled from more than exhaustion now. "That's exactly why I couldn't tell you." In the weeks that followed, Hanna's decline moved faster than anyone had prepared for. The cancer, unmasked and unchecked for too long, spread with a speed that stole the ground from beneath the whole family. On what both of them somehow knew, without saying, was one of her final lucid afternoons, Hanna asked Chinedu to sit close and made him promise her something that made no sense to him at all. "No matter what happens," she said, her voice thin but steady, "don't hate them forever." Chinedu's jaw tightened. "Hanna, they tortured you. They tortured you and you were sick the entire time. I will never forgive them." "I'm not asking you to forgive them today. I'm asking you to promise that someday you will let it go." She managed a small, weak smile. "You'll understand one day why I'm asking this." "I don't understand it now." "I know," she whispered, closing her eyes, "but you will." He didn't understand that day, and not for a long time after, but he promised her anyway because it was the last thing he asked of him, and there was nothing in the world he would not have given her by then. Hanna died on a Tuesday morning, quietly, her hand in her husband's, the sun just beginning to climb over the hospital window ledge. The funeral was small, quiet, thick with a grief no one expected to feel this deeply for a woman two of the mourners had spent a year calling an enemy. Chinedu's sisters and mother were present at the funeral, crying uncontrollably, and you could see the guilt eating them badly. It was Hanna's mother who approached Chinedu at the graveside, an envelope trembling in her weathered hands. She asked him to give you this when the time came. Inside was proof that while they mocked her for hiding pills they assumed were about infertility, she had been dying in front of them the entire time.
Chinedu's knees buckled at the graveside. 2 men had to catch him before he hit the ground. Weeks later, packing away his wife's belongings with hands that still didn't quite believe what they were doing, Chinedu found a small flash drive tucked inside her jewelry box, the same box that had once held letters no one would ever read. He plugged it into his laptop that night, alone, and found dozens of video files, each one recorded in the quiet aftermath of a cruelty he was only now learning about in full. In each video, Hanna sat facing the camera, sometimes with tears still wet on her face, sometimes managing a small, private laugh at her own exhaustion. She never once used the recordings to accuse. She used them the way she'd used everything else in that house, to protect the people who had hurt her. The final video, recorded only 9 days before her collapse, undid him completely. "If you're watching this," she said, her voice steady despite everything, "then I need you to hear something clearly, because I know you, Chinedu. I know what you'll want to do. Please, don't spend the rest of your life hating them. Hate doesn't punish the people who hurt us, it only finishes the job they started." She paused, wiping her eyes, and smiled directly into the camera, as though she could see him watching years into a future she would never reach. "I love you. I have loved you since the day you told your sisters to stand on their own feet, because I knew, in that one sentence, exactly what kind of man I was marrying. Don't let what they did turn you into someone I wouldn't recognize." Even in death, she was still protecting the people who had destroyed her. Grief, when it has nowhere gentle to go, often becomes fury instead. By the following month, he had systematically, coldly dismantled every piece of financial support he had built around his family for 15 years. He removed his mother's name from every property he had financed. He cancelled every recurring bill he had quietly paid for over a decade. He put the family house on the market within 6 weeks and sold it to the first buyer who could close quickly. Ngozi's boutique, the third attempt, financed once again on her brother's goodwill, folded within 2 months. Chiamaka's car was repossessed. Their mother, for the first time in her adult life, learned what it felt like to budget for rent. They called him. He did not answer. They wrote to him. He did not reply. For the first time since he was 19 years old, Chinedu let the people he loved fall, because he no longer trusted himself to catch them without hating them while he did it. It would take a death of their own and a diary he had not yet found for him to understand that his revenge was only the beginning of a truth far larger than any of them had imagined. Hanna's mother died 8 months after her daughter, quietly in her sleep, as though she had simply been waiting to see her son-in-law safely through the worst of his grief before allowing herself to rest. Before she passed, Chinedu handed her a final envelope, the twin of the one she'd given him at the graveside. Inside was Hanna's diary, years of entries written in the same careful hand as the burned letters no one had ever read. He expected pain. He expected fury. What he found instead broke him in an entirely different way. Page after page was filled not with resentment toward her sisters who had tormented her, but with prayers for them, for their peace, for their healing, for the day, she wrote, when they finally see themselves the way I've always seen them, frightened women who never learned they were allowed to build something of their own. Deeper in the diary, Chinedu found something that stopped his breath entirely. Quiet records of transfers, dates, amounts. Ngozi's final semester of a professional course paid anonymously the same month she'd been mocking Hanna's barren secret. Chiamaka's rent covered without her knowledge for 4 consecutive months during the boutique's collapse. His own mother's hospital bill from 18 months earlier, the one everyone assumed Chinedu himself had quietly paid, actually settled by Hanna, transferred through an account that traced back in the end to her wife's own modest savings. The woman they had called greedy, manipulative, a thief of their brother's love, had been the one quietly keeping them from drowning the entire time. asking nothing, telling no one, not even the husband whose money would have made the sacrifice far easier to bear. Their hatred, it turned out, had been aimed at the one person who never stopped trying to save them. There was one more page. Tucked into the back of the diary, folded twice, was a laboratory report Chinedu did not immediately understand until he read the names printed at the top and the single line beneath them. A DNA report, his family's names, and a single result that reorganized 15 years of his life in a single sentence. Chiamaka was not his biological sister. She had been adopted as an infant after the sudden death of his father's closest friend in a road accident left the child with no living family. His parents had raised her exactly as their own, never once telling her, never once treating her as anything but a daughter, believing, as many parents of their generation believed, that some truths were kinda left buried. Hanna discovered the report years earlier during her engagement to Chinedu. She never told a soul, not her mother, not her own mother, until the very end. She carried the secret the same way she carried her illness, silently, at personal cost, because she believed with a conviction that had defined every choice she ever made. Family was built by love and choice, never by blood alone. The very sister who had hated her most fiercely, who had called her poison, who had laughed over medication she never understood, had been, without knowing it, protected by the one woman with the power to shatter her entire identity, and chose, every single day, not to. 2 years after Hanna's death, Chinedu's sisters and mother were still begging for his forgiveness. Ngozi stood at the hospital beside their mother, looking sad and tired. Their mother had been sick for some while now. She broke down in the waiting room alone and whispered to no one and everyone, "I finally know how much you are hurting, and you never once hated me for it. I'm so sorry, Hanna and Chinedu." The door opened behind her. Chinedu walked in, not because she had called him, but because their mother, humbled by 2 years of consequence, had finally told him the truth of what her daughter was facing. Ngozi looked up at her brother, and for the first time since her wedding day whispers, expected nothing but the rejection she believed, finally, she had earned. Instead, Chinedu crossed the small waiting room, sat down beside her sister, and pulled her into his arms without a single word of accusation. Not because she deserved it, but because Hanna had already forgiven her years before either of them had the courage to understand why. He thought of his sisters, humbled, changed, slowly rebuilding not the comfort they'd lost, but something steadier, something earned. He thought of Chiamaka, who now knew the truth about her own beginning and had chosen in the end to love the family that raised her anyway. He thought of his mother, quieter now, gentler, visiting this same grave some Sundays with flowers of her own. He thought of a woman who spent the last years of her life being hated by people she was secretly saving, and who had asked him with her final strength, not for revenge, but for mercy. "Now," Chinedu said, softly, rising to his feet, "I'll keep mine." He turned and walked back toward the car, toward the family that remained, toward a peace that had cost more than any of them should have ever had to pay, but which Hanna, in the end, had made sure they would find anyway.